Hey everyone, welcome back to our study in Jude. Today I'm really excited. It's very meaty. We got a lot of facts, a lot of history to go over. I know that just got everyone excited. Everyone loves facts and history. And we're going to begin in Jude chapter 1, because that's the only chapter there is, verse 5. So let's just look at it real quick. I'm going to be reading out of the NIV today. Though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. These three examples that Jude is using would be very familiar to the Jews at the time. And before we get into all that stuff, I just want to point out that these men that were corrupting the church thought they were making it better. And Jude reminds us that there were those who lost their way before the end, and these are examples of that. And he starts out with those who were delivered from Egypt. And I think most of us are familiar with the story, but let's jump in, and we're going to read Numbers 13 and 14. Not all the way through, don't get scared. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." And then let's skip to 26, because not a lot happens in 2 to 25, let's be honest. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there." Descendants of Anak. This is so exciting. It mentions them several times throughout the Bible. And it mentions them in Deuteronomy 2:10. And we're going to go there. It actually has a bunch of places in the Bible that they are mentioned. And we actually have all the verses, if you're that type of person, to look up in your workbook if you want to see, just to see, fact check me, you know? Does he know what he's talking about? Yes, I do. All right, so in Deuteronomy 2:10 and 11, it says, "The Emites used to live there, a people strong and numerous, and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they too were considered Rephaites, but the Moabites called them Emites." That's a lot of names, right? You're like, why did you read this? This is so confusing. What we really want to look at is Anakites and Rephaites, because the Anakites are descendants or considered to be Rephaites. Okay, so let's look at another verse that describes them. We already saw there that it says they were very tall, but in Deuteronomy 3:11, it talks about a Rephaite. Og, king of Bashan, was the last of the Rephaites. His bed was decorated with iron and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. It is still in Rabbah of the Ammonites. So this was like verifiable, they're saying. So you're wondering, like, what is a cubit, and why did they measure this guy's bed? Who goes around measuring beds? Well, actually, we think they're talking about his beer. No, like where his deathbed, if you will. And so this bed is 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. And it says that it's still there to this day. You can go check it out. So the Rephaites and the Anakites are well known for their height. It's actually believed that Goliath was a descendant of them. Okay, so you look at David and the fear that was in the Israelite army due to this one giant, and you can get an idea of how these people feel about going and taking the land that is full of Goliaths. Okay, and these Anakites and the Rephaites aren't just mentioned in the Bible. They're actually in Egyptian records of the 2nd millennium BC, so we know they existed. So we can see why the Israelites might be scared to go take this land. I do want to point out before we move forward that they were listening to the leaders that they had chosen. These people they sent in as spies. Who do you send in as spies? If each tribe is choosing one person, they're sending someone in that they're saying, this person, we're going to trust their report. This is someone of great report with us, at least. We trust this person, and we're going to go with what they say. They had chosen them as their leaders who were trustworthy. right? And so this is what we're looking at here in Jude, is that sometimes people lead us astray. I think the first problem the Israelites had was in who they chose to send. We know Joshua and Caleb are the only 2 out of 12 spies who had a good report, the only ones who believed that God would give them the land. And so I think that they started messing up in who they chose as their leaders, and we have to be mindful of this same thing. Now let's look real quick at Numbers 13, 32, and 33, because we can see these spies, these leaders they chosen, begin to give a bad report. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there were of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." So here we see that they begin to kind of make up stuff too, these leaders they'd chosen, right? This land devours everyone. They actually instilled more fear in the Israelites. One of the reasons we looked at this verse is because it's talking about the Anakites, the descendants of Anak. It says they come from the Nephilim. I don't know if you're familiar with the Nephilim, but we're going to look at it real quick because it's super interesting and super cool and exciting. Or maybe none of those things, but we're going to look at it anyway. All right, and so we're going to look in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, where it talks about the Nephilim. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal, and their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." So these Nephilim are believed are the angels who left heaven to come down because of their lust. And we're actually going to jump into that a little later, which is why we looked at it. But also, we want to see these descendants of Anak. People thought that they were descendants of the Nephilim, and they might have been. So this would instill even greater fear into the Israelites. After this happens, after they decide they are not going in, Joshua pleads with the people to go in, to believe God, to put their faith in him. We're gonna catch up in Numbers 14, verse 8 through 11. "If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them for giving a good report, for asking them to believe in God. This is crazy. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I have performed among them?" God has a point here, doesn't he? I mean, these people, before, up to this point, they've seen all the plagues in Egypt, which were crazy, and there were enough of them. If you don't know the story, go and look at that. They saw the Red Sea parted. They saw a pillar of fire that led them by night and a cloud by day. They were fed with manna. They saw water flow from a rock. They saw Moses go up on a mountain and talk with God and come back, and his face was shining with the glory of God. And still, when they get to this point, they don't believe. They don't trust in God. They put their faith in their leaders rather than in God. I think sometimes we think that if we had seen the things that happened in the Bible, if I saw those miracles, if I saw the God of the Old Testament, or if I saw Jesus in person raising the dead, it would be a lot easier to believe. The faith I would have would be immense. But I think we can see from examples in the Bible that it doesn't necessarily mean it would increase our faith or cause us to believe. We might still be just as faithless as the Israelites in this situation. So after the Israelites decide they're not going in and they just show an utter lack of faith in the God who has led them through, Moses, because he is a great leader, pleads with God for their forgiveness. And this happens in Numbers 14. We're going to look at 20 through 24, and then we'll jump back in at 26. It says, "The Lord replied, 'I have forgiven them, as you asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory in the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised an oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." And jump to 26. "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell me, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more who has counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community which has banded together against me. They will meet their end in this wilderness, for here they will die." It's uplifting. That's an uplifting scripture. I love that. So I read that because it sounds really like, whoa. But the people reading Jude, they know this story by heart. They know this ending. They know what the Lord says. They know the punishment for the unfaithfulness of the Israelites. And so as they're seeing that example that Jude sets forth, all of that information is just running through their brains, okay? It sounds to us like merely a mention. But to the Israelites reading this, all of that information is already here and it's just clicking in their brains. Jude is warning them not to be led astray, as the Israelites were led astray by those they had chosen as their leaders. That's where it began. They were led astray by the people they trusted, the people they said, these are trustworthy. We will abide by their ruling, by their word. They ended up trusting them over God, and it cost them. It cost them. His next example is in verse 6. "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling." Jude mentioning the story of the promised land most likely leads to this next example because of the tie-in with the Nephilim. That's why we looked at that passage. Here Jude references the book of Enoch. We talked about that before. This is one of those references that's not in the Bible, which tells of a civil war in heaven where some angels rose up against God behind Lucifer and were cast out. There's actually two biblical verses that mention this, Isaiah 14:12 and Luke 10:18. I encourage you to look them up. And we know it mentions the Nephilim falling from grace, the angels falling from heaven or coming down from heaven in Genesis 6:1-4. I want to talk real quick about these two different stories and the different causes for the civil war and the angels to leave heaven to come down to the daughters of men. The civil war in heaven in the book of Enoch is because of pride. They wanted an authority that wasn't given to them. They reached above their station. They wanted more. And that is why the civil war happens behind Lucifer. And in the story in the Bible, in the Nephilim, these other angels, maybe the same ones, maybe different, came down because of their lust, because they wanted to have sex with the daughters of men. So we see that these angels in these high positions left their lofty places because of pride and lust. And the mention of lust in this story leads us to his next example of Sodom and Gomorrah. To us, it seems all over the place, but this is one continuous thought. It is the lust of the angels that connects to the next example of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is known for the sin of sexual perversion, falling prey to their lusts. So let's look at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is referenced throughout Scripture as an example of the sin of man and the judgment of God. I actually put a ton of verses that you can look up in your workbook to see all the places that Sodom and Gomorrah is mentioned. It's actually mentioned by Jesus himself. And we're going to look at the passages that Jesus mentions Sodom and Gomorrah. And the first one is in Matthew 10:15. And he actually says the same exact thing in Matthew 11:24. We're not going to look at that one because, like I said, he says the same exact thing. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town." So we see Jesus mentioning this, so we know it's real because we trust Jesus, right? We believe him. Also in Luke 17:29, it says, "It was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. This is also mentioned in Romans, 2 Peter, and Revelation. Because the Israelites knew this story so well, we're going to really dive into it so we know exactly what they were receiving from this text that Jude is writing. So we're going to jump into this story at Genesis 19, but let's play catch up real quick. I know I'm giving you a ton of information. If you need to take a break, if you need to pause the video, go get a drink and let your mind rest, do that. But the rest of us, we're just going to jump in, okay? God tells Abraham that he will destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, for the outcry is great and their sin is grievous, meaning very serious, causing great sadness. And Abraham pleads for them, pleads for the city. And he starts out, if you know the story, he says, God, what if there's 50 righteous people in the city? And God's like, okay, I won't destroy it if there's 50. And Abraham says, what if there's 45? What if there's 40? And he takes God down. First he goes by increments of 5, and then he jumps down from 40. What if there's 30, God? What if there's 20? What if there's 10? And he gets God down to 10. And God says, fine, if there are 10, I won't destroy the city. Because God knows there's not 10, right? Or he wouldn't go destroy the city. Now, Abraham must be aware of the situation of the city to take the number so low, right? In our cities, we would be like, God, there's got to be 50. I mean, we'd probably start out, what if there's 1,000, right? We wouldn't start at 50. Abraham knows what's up in the city. It has a reputation for him to intentionally go all the way down to 10 people. Before we actually get into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, I want to talk about facts. I want to talk about history. Okay, some exciting things because I just love when history and archaeology proves what we already know. Some people didn't believe that Sodom and Gomorrah actually existed. It was nowhere on a map. However, in the early 1920s, Dr. Nelson Gleck discovered evidence of an ancient route between Mesopotamia and the Dead Sea area. This route had been covered by desert storms and wind, but another, more recent desert storm uncovered this path. They also found mentions of this route in cuneiform tablets in Mari and in Ebla. And so now archaeologists believe they have discovered the site of Sodom and Gomorrah in Tal el-Hammam. And we're going to get into more of that a little bit later. But right now, let's jump into the story at Genesis 19, 1 through 3. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. Lot greets them outside the city to escort them. I think he knows the danger, right? Now, it might have been hospitality to meet them and lead them to the house, but he's like, let's go straight to my house. We don't need to see anything. Wash your feet. You can stay the night and you can leave in the morning. Like, how many people say that when you have guests? You meet them out in the driveway, you're like, hey, how are you doing? Let's go right in here. Go in, wash your feet, go to bed, wake up, and then you can go. So nice to see you. So if Lot is aware of what is going on in the city, so much so that he wants to protect his visitors, why is he here? Why is he living here? Well, we have to back up a little bit to Genesis 13. When Abraham and Lot separate, Abraham lets Lot decide which way he will go. They were traveling together, and some disagreements between their herdsmen caused them, let's separate, we're too big. And he says, Lot, which way do you want to go? Which land do you want? And we see this interaction in Genesis 13, verses 11 and 12. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Very next verse. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. It was already happening. Why did he set up his tent there? Well, because what he saw when he looked at the land, when he was deciding which land he wanted, he saw what looked good to a man's eyes, and he chose that. Abraham knew that the blessing is where the Lord is. That's why he let Lot decide, because he knew that God would bless him either way. And so Lot sets up his camp near Sodom, which was already sinning greatly. This is a good example for us to look at. If we set up camp near enough to sin, there's a good chance we begin to compromise. And we're going to see some compromises that Lot has made. So Lot gets these angels through the city to his house, safe and sound, right? No. Soon enough, the word gets out. And let's see what happens when the word gets out that Lot has these visitors within his house. In Genesis 19:4. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Now, if you have the original text, what it says is, because you might be like, I have a Bible that says something different. Why does it say sex? Mine says to know them. The men said they wanted to know them. Well, the Hebrew word for to know means to have sexual intercourse with. It's actually the same word used in Genesis 4:1 when it says, "And Adam knew his wife and she conceived." The word to know means to have sex with. And the word is actually yada. So if you're thinking, did he just yada yada sex? Yes, I did. Okay? More recently, some scholars have said that, or interpreted that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, the prime sin, was a lack of hospitality. But we can tell by these interactions that what their main sin was. And in Genesis 19:6-8, let's continue through the story. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." Now you might be thinking, what an awful father. Why would he do that? That sounds so extreme, right? But his cultural obligation at the time to protect those under his roof is immense. Okay, and that is his primary concern right now, protecting those people who have come under his hospitality. But I also think that being in close proximity to these sinful people has made this an option in his mind. So the men, they don't want that. That's not good enough. So they try to break down the door. But the angels pull Lot inside and strike those outside with blindness so they can't find the door. And we'll pick back up in Genesis 19:15-17. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." And let's pick back up in 23-26. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities in the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now let's talk real quick about the destruction of these cities, because it does mention here and in another place, Jesus actually says it later about the sulfur, burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. Now let's get into some exciting things. Okay, so they've been excavating Tal El Hammam, and the excavations are revealing that there was great prosperity in the area until the city came to a sudden and instantaneous end in what is described as utter destruction around 3,700 years ago in the 1700s BC, which is consistent with the biblical time period. The surrounding areas remained inhospitable for over 500 years and even now are uncultivatable. The area is high in saline and is quite dead. It is home to the world's deepest hypersaline lake, the Dead Sea, which is 10 times saltier than the ocean. So let me tell you some things they found while excavating this city. They found mud brick structures that completely disappeared, leaving only scorched foundations and floors buried beneath 3 feet of dark gray ash. They found bricks showing signs of being incinerated. Pottery shards were discovered to have melted into glass, and zircon crystals were formed in the pottery, indicating they were exposed to heat in excess of 2,000 degrees, which is like volcanic magma. Okay, there was also evidence that mineral grains had rained down, and they estimate 40,000 to 65,000 people would have been killed instantly. Even today, the region remains synonymous with death. The Bible mentions that the cities were destroyed by fire and brimstone, which is sulfur, and the Dead Sea area is full of asphalt and sulfur. Even the stones here are prone to burning. The Greeks called the Dead Sea Lake Asphaltes because of the sulfur. Now, there's two theories as to what happened to this area. And this isn't like what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah, but what happened to this area they're excavating. And there's two theories. One is that a meteorite exploded in the air above. The other theory is that the soil in this region is prone to develop huge reservoirs of gas and oil beneath the surface. An earthquake would likely cause these pockets to explode, throwing oil into the air, which would fall back down in a fiery rain. Now, just so I can get this out of the way, I'm not someone who needs a scientific natural cause for the works of God. God can just be like fireballs and they come down, right? I know there's a big move even in the Christian realm to do this. I know that I've heard some things where people say, well, Moses didn't really part the Red Sea. What he did was he just had a really, he knew a lot about tides, right? And which is funny to me because we look at the Egyptians as one of the most intelligent time periods and locations, and we don't even know how they built the pyramids. It's unimaginable to me that they would have been outsmarted by this man, and then as they're drowning, they're like, we should have been studying tides. Give me a break. God can do what he wants to do. But I do love when science and archaeology prove what we already know. Now, either of these situations, either of these theories of how this city was destroyed would have created billowing clouds, which could be seen in Mamre, where Abraham would have had a clear view of the southern portion of the Dead Sea. Now, let's talk about Lot for a second. Because in 2 Peter 2:7, it calls Lot a righteous man, which when I look at this, I'm like, I don't see it. I'm sorry, I don't see it. But they say that he is. And maybe he was. If it says Lot is a righteous man, then he was. But we can see that there are consequences for a tolerance of sin, right? The consequences for Lot, his wife turns around and becomes a pillar of salt. Something in her heart mourned the loss. Something in her heart longed for what was, or was unwilling to let it go. She looked back. And honestly, we can do the same thing and become trapped in our old sins when we constantly look back and mourn the loss of what was. Another consequence, which is pretty hefty in my book, is in Genesis 19:33. Well, I'm just going to read this real quick, or you might not even believe it. So Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." That night, they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. How does this idea even come in their heads? How does this seem like a good plan? Well, because of their close proximity to sin. I don't think Lot had any idea how ingrained in this society his family had become. His wife looks back. She obviously had an affinity for the city. It's hard for her to leave it, even though it just had so much sin in the city that God was going to destroy it because their sin was so grievous. And we see that his daughters have this idea to sleep with him, and though they might have had good intentions, right? What is normal to them is what they've seen in their lives while they're being raised with all this sin around them. We never know how much sin is seeping into our lives when we live in close proximity to it. And we don't know how it's seeping into the lives of those around us. We have to be watchful. I remember I took a college religion course with my friend, and we'd both been raised in the church, same number of years. And the religion professor, his main goal was to convince us God did not exist. And everything he said, like I had a question on the test that was like, does God exist? And there was a right and a wrong answer, which I put the right answer. I remember everything he said was just bouncing off me. And I assumed, because he had the same upbringing, that everything was bouncing off him too. But 10 years later, and it might have been even longer after he had stopped being a Christian, we had a conversation, and he just casually mentioned to me, man, that religion professor we had in college, he made a lot of sense. And I was just heartbroken because I never even thought that it was affecting him any different. I never even thought that he was accepting it, that he was taking it in. We have to be watchful. And these examples that Jude is giving, this continuous example to the Jewish people, is how we have to be ever watchful. That following God and seeking truth are daily decisions. This was a reminder that we can still fall into sin and fall away. These examples of the Israelites who came out of Egypt and saw God do so many things, but in the end were kept out of the promised land. The example of the angels who were in the promised land, who were with God and still chose, because of sin, to leave him. And here we have Sodom and Gomorrah, who don't even know him at all. 3 different levels of knowing God, and they all miss it. These are all poignant examples that Jude is giving to his readers, that destruction can come when we're not following Christ daily. He's reminding us that we can be led astray. We can be led astray by false leaders, and that is what's happening in the church. These people have chosen leaders who are leading them astray. And we know from these examples that the way they're leading them astray is probably through sexual perversion and immorality. And Jude is warning them, hey, be mindful, be watchful. Anyone can lose their way before the end. Let's commune with Christ daily. Let's make a commitment to follow him daily, to be watchful, to seek truth daily in every decision. Jude is warning us to contend for the faith, to be watchful, because we can be destroyed before the end. Sin is always coming for us. The enemy is always coming for us, and we have to be watchful with a sword in one hand and a tool in the other as we build the kingdom of God.